I want to thank Brandon and the Chamber for allowing us to do this. The office plays a pretty critical role in the pandemic, I think, and we've learned a whole lot this year about trying to educate our clients, and not so much on what we can do with furniture, but how furniture and interior design helps with the culture and how we deal with this. Luckily, you don't have to hear from me. Our speaker is Brad Burrows. He is the Senior Workspace Strategist with Haworth and the North American Strategy Manager. Haworth is our strategically aligned manufacturing partner. Although we represent a number of brands, Haworth is who we go to battle with almost all of the time. So they are an incredible company, family owned and operated out of Holland, Michigan. They've been around since about the same length of time as us, since 1948. So for those that do know me and our organization, and for those that don't, we do sell products. We do design and logistical services. But what some people don't know, and what some of our clients don't get to experience, is the additional resources that we have to offer. And what you'll hear from Brad today is what that's all about. A lot of the things that Brad does and a lot of the papers that he writes can really be game changers for some of the organizations that we partner with and support. It's some really mind-blowing stuff on how that the furniture guy and the furniture company supports the clients that we work with, and the resources that come from Haworth and our collective brands are just really incredible. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Brad and get our technical difficulty screen out of here.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. And as I start to share my desktop here, I want to thank the Chamber today. I think the topics that we're really hitting and addressing are very, very important. And how we start to talk about, moving beyond the pandemic and starting to move into kind of the phase of actually going back into the workplace is very, very important. By the way, Charlie, if there's any notes or anything on your end that you see, please let me know, as I'm not able to see that on my side as I'm displaying. So please just stop me and interrupt me if there's any questions or anything like that. Please feel free, everyone, to add any comments to the chat section, any questions that you have, and so forth. And the one thing I want to talk a little bit about is how we have to basically build and support. Vinny did a great job just now talking about the state of where we are and all the things that have to happen. So this is really looking at kind of that future state as we move back into the workplace, and where are we going. My position is actually I'm part of a research team. I'm part of a analytics team. I'm part of a team that basically is looking at how we can transform the workplace. This is an unprecedented point in time. I think workplace is completely changing, and the future of how we work is obviously very different, as most of us are working out of our houses and working remotely. Obviously, there's a lot of frontline folks that are doing an amazing job right now that are in the workplace. And so we also have to remember that they're out there in our daily lives, and we thank them for all that great work that they're doing. But when we look at the workplace, we need to think about three things. And we've talked to probably over 300 companies, logging and basically understanding exactly where people's minds are. What does the floor plate need to do? And three topics have really risen to the top. And that's the things we're going to talk about today. The first one's employee well-being, which is supporting people's physical and psychological mental health. Obviously critical right now as we're in this pandemic and what's going on with the pandemic. The second one is organizational culture. And we're starting to see that companies are having a lot of issues with remote workers, and it's very different than having people in the workplace. It's not as easy to be connected to your workplace. So your culture becomes critical. And the last thing is really around transforming the floor plates. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about 6-foot circles today and so forth, but more around research that we're doing about how to transform the workplace and what people are giving us insights into as they think about going back into the workplace. What and how can the workplace start to really perform to help you? So the first one's employee well-being. So we obviously said this is about supporting our psychological and physical health, right? So we need to maintain this. This is a critical area right now. We all know, and everybody on this call understands, that the employees are the lifeblood of our organization. So we really need to support them and really harness the power that they have right now, because there's a lot of differences in their world that is happening. So what we're seeing, and we actually, Business Wire actually looked at this and started to understand the stress levels that employees are experiencing right now. They found that 69% of workers claim that this is the most stressful time in their professional career. Now we're talking about, things like 9/11. We're talking about the Great Recession of 2008. So this is a very, very high stress level, and we need to bring a lot of empathy and be sympathetic. As managers and directors in our organizations, we really have to be thinking about how can we keep our employees' health very, very strong, and that includes their mental health. The second thing that was interesting about this study is that it actually went across every demographic, and even people that are at age 55. Now, when we normally study these types of studies, we normally see that at age 55, most people are in part of their career path where they have a very high knowledge, high autonomy, and they understand what to do and how to connect. This one is actually stressing them out too, which was kind of insightful. And then the other thing is we found that 91% of workers are really kind of reporting it moderate to extreme stress as we've kind of transitioned into the workplace. So why do we care? Why do we need to invest in our employees? Well, looking at MIT, they basically did a study on this, and 25% have greater profitability. There's 2 times more innovation and 2 times more customer satisfaction when we're dealing with outside resources. This is critical as more and more companies are trying to figure out, how do we collaborate? How do we innovate? How do we really get our people connected to what's going on inside the organization? So when we break that down just a little bit, we start to see that there are some foundational issues that really need to be examined as we start to kind of talk about kind of who our organizations and who our companies are. The first one is our values, obviously who we are as a company. The purpose and what we're here to do, right? Our culture, we talked a little bit about, and we're going to explore that a lot more. And then finally, our brand. But 2 areas of this have really risen to the top. There's also subcategories of this around experience, right? And the experience with the employees, anything that happens from the very first time they know about your industry all the way through. But what we're seeing is really the values and culture are really being taxed right now. And employees are feeling the stress in these 2 areas. And so we really need to think about our values and how we can support our people, and how that culture is having an impact. And being remote, that there's a lot of lost information that's occurring basically through video conferencing and things like that. So what's happening? Obviously 2020, if we were to call, there's 2 words that come to mind. One is flexibility and the second one is disruption. And so as we know, there have been massive job losses around this pandemic. And so this was a survey a few months ago, but over 33 million people have lost their job through this pandemic. There's also a lot of stress in actually transitioning from the workplace out back into the home. And as we know, in 2017, there was about 8 million people working at home, and now there's over 50 million people doing this. Well, that comes with a lot of stress too, right? How many times have we been on conference calls and our kids come running in or need help with their homework, or having technology issues, or even kind of having those kind of, start and stop moments of trying to help our kids and work through this. But there are some pluses, right? So we're going to look at some of the good and the bad of working at home. And one of the good things is actually we're working a little bit more and actually helping, as most people are kind of using that not going into the workplace is actually an opportunity to do a little bit of extra work. And we're getting about 2 more hours per day is on average. So let's talk a little bit about the mental health aspect of this. And obviously before the pandemic, we were looking at about 450 million people were suffering from different health challenges. And so what we're seeing is that number is just going off the charts right now, and that people don't know how to deal with a lot of the stresses. Everywhere we turn and everything that we do, we keep hearing about COVID and so forth. And this can kind of be a very, very stressful time on our workers. And we really need to understand that. As leaders in these organizations, we need to bring more empathy and sympathy to what people are dealing with and how flexible we can be as we work through that. So this is an interesting slide. I find that what's happening is Dr. Alan Hamilton is a neurosurgeon and author. And what he has discovered is really around that our brains are failing us. And the reason our brains are failing us is because of the way we start to map and understand and work through problems. And what he said is that basically when we basically combine being and basically experience, and that equals our memories. We take our memories and we basically put those into kind of our present conditions and create new conditions out of that. So those become kind of predictions, if you will. When we overlay behaviors on top of that, what happens is we actually start to anticipate the outcomes of where we'll go, what we'll do, how we'll react to certain things. Well, what's happening is none of us have gone through a pandemic, as we just talked about in the earlier session. Everybody's trying to scramble a little bit, figure out what's going on, which way is up. And this is causing our brains to actually malfunction and fail us because we're using historic data, these memories that we talked about, these behaviors, these things to predict the future. They don't necessarily connect is the problem because we've never been through that. So be aware that there are issues and problems and people are dealing with things that they've never seen before and that there's a lot of issues that are happening. So as we kind of look to the future, we kind of also look to our past to say, okay, what are some of the things that we can move forward with? What are some of the things that we need to help our employees to kind of move and work right now and really start to help? And some of that was really about bringing 3 things to the workplace. Obviously, we need to move. We still need to move and getting people active. There's more people kind of walking now outside, doing more things, and that's great. So support that and really help them to kind of bridge that gap. Get them moving throughout the day instead of just sitting in their chair all day. The second thing is they need to focus. We've talked a little bit about our kids and basically that interruption factor, or maybe our pets and cats and other things that are kind of walking on our desk in front of our meetings, and this is kind of distracting. So having the ability to find areas to focus become absolutely critical. And third is the thing that we're all missing, and that's that social connection so that we can basically reconnect, so that we can have a hug from our friends and our employees and just give everybody kind of that support that we all need. There's so many studies around what is actually happening right now that is so critical that we're all lacking that. Even the introverts of us that are out there are now actually wanting to have a hug, believe it or not. All right, so let's look a little bit at organizational culture. And so when we look at organizational culture, I need to introduce you to our competing values framework. And this is a framework that basically looks at an organization and says, how flexible are you in the vertical axis here? And then how are you internally or externally focused along the way? So as we look at our first group, our yellow group, it's our collaborative group. And this is really doing things that last. This is our group of people that basically are very connected to the organization. These are the people that want to have lunch with everybody and talk about everything and understand how people are doing. They're kind of our glue, if you will, inside of our organization. They're basically, want to do these kind of share information, share about friends, but it's really that the workplace is a social element, and they're connected to our community and they share our knowledge throughout. The opposite side of that's our blue group, our compete, or doing things now. And so the thing that we need to understand with this is that this group is really focused on profit and speed. Think of sales groups, right? How fast can we get through this? How fast can we perform? And how are we going to be measured off of this? And what rewards do we have around that performance? Our red group, or our control group, is really about doing things right. So think about people that are about getting things done on time, on schedule, and on budget. So this is really a process-oriented group, a group that basically is really effective at getting things done and communicating things and developing policies around how to get things done. And finally, our innovative group, our breakthrough group. This is the group that wants to do new things or be very, very creative along the way. But each one of these culture types have an interesting thing. If you look at a control group versus a create group, there's a natural friction there because the control group actually wants to control the process, hence the name. The create group are creating. And so there's friction there between how long things take, what's the budget, I don't know, I need the next big idea, and so forth. But what we're finding is that these cultures are actually have different reactions in the COVID right now. So let's look at this from 3 aspects again: the employee well-being, the organizational culture, and transforming the floor plate. And so as we look at our first group, our collaborate group, our yellow group, remember that's our kumbaya group, our folks that really want kind of connection through the workplace. This group is actually suffering the most right now. This is the group of folks that are actually struggling because they're not connected. They're not seeing people. They're not mentally connected. So we have to think about, from an employee well-being standpoint, what can we do to help support them? How can we help to encourage them, to reach out to others and to find those impacts? This is the group that we're actually studying to see if they have the long-term impacts, and what are those long-term impacts. From a cultural standpoint, obviously, they're the folks that, are sharing thoughts and opinions, and they're, again, our organizational glue. So they're helping support our culture inside the workplace. So allowing people to really share their thoughts, their opinions, is absolutely critical with this group of folks. And then finally, transforming the floor plate. And this is really about where this culture is going to struggle, because these folks are not going to enjoy social distancing. These people are not going to do well with social distancing, because everybody in the organization is part of the family. So think about that and what stresses that's going to put on the organization as we go through. So the blue group, our compete group now. So as we look at this group is actually the one that is most poised to come through the pandemic the best. This is the group that is actually short-term performance, very fast, remember again. But actually, as we look at this group is quick to adapt, and they'll basically work well as a group and basically start to quickly come in and get out. So they're actually very well positioned on this. The things that they'll struggle with are actually that things will take too long as they go throughout this process. So if we kind of get stuck in the yellow process, or maybe trying to help these other people, this group's really going to struggle with, let's get to it. Let's get to it. We understand. Let's move. Let's do something. And then finally, from a spatial and floor plate transformation, we really need to think about individual group needs and how we can socially separate them and distance them, of course. Our challenge with the red group, or our control group, is that, this group is absolutely happy about understanding, creating new processes, creating new formulas, creating the kind of how we get back into the workplace. So really reach out to our people here in these groups to help us to communicate, build those kind of processes that we need to everyone to understand how to get back. The key with this group from an organizational culture standpoint is to really explain the process, have short-term meetings, help them understand that we need to connect and here's how we do it. So we're really checking to make sure that they're on target, that the mission hasn't changed. So big picture, we're trying to allow them to have smaller and quicker meetings and so forth. So as we move back into the floor plate, we really need to think about that and how we can connect that to their expectations. The next group is the green group, and this is really around kind of employee well-being, which is really important. And this group, remember, these are our breakthrough innovators, if you will. Think of Steve Jobs and how he had this mission or this vision of kind of a new iPhone, and everything had to be controlled with your finger and be able to do this. It transformed the world. So this group is really about these big ideas. And so the employee well-being becomes really important. The way this group actually uses space is really important, because they leverage space to actually help inspire. These are the groups that they see something or look at something and really jump into something to understand. So how can we use space to actually inspire creativity, innovation? Those types of things become absolutely critical. And so as we kind of move forward, we have to find ways to share ideas, to get things out, and to allow people to have a way to kind of see things, process information. And as they walk by, they can actually see that and leverage new ideas and build off of that. This group is struggling with brainstorming because they really want to connect. They really need to build off and synergize off of ideas. And even though we have technologies that help enable this, we're seeing this as a group that's actually struggling to have that kind of instantaneous ideas. Brainstorming activities are really kind of suffering a little bit. So as we look at the floor plate, we've got to figure out how to leverage and create flexibility for this group, because they're the ones that are going to have to kind of change and adapt and make sure the space is absolutely intuitive to use, but absolutely as flexible as possible. So as we move into transforming the floor plate, I promised you all that we wouldn't be talking about 6-foot circles. Still believe in a lot of the 6-foot circle information, but as you look at 6-foot circles information, you also need to look at duration of how long people are going to be in the workspace. And so 6 feet maybe is not enough. A lot of customers are actually starting to look at higher distances for the near future and what that implication has. It's actually not as bad as you would think. But again, that's for each company to understand and the impacts of that. So let's look at some of the things that have happened. So let's talk about how we have the office in the home, and what are some of the good things and what are some of the bad things that we're studying out of this. Well, we're part of the Leesman's group, and they did a global workplace survey for 2020. And the last time I checked, I think this was over 100,000 participants worldwide that were involved with this study. And what we're finding is that there are some activities that are actually better for home. So this is a good thing. So we need to learn about these things to actually leverage those things. So obviously, the first thing that comes to mind that as we look at what's better at home is private conversations, right? We've got a lot of privacy, and the ability to share things is actually much easier. So we can leverage that. The second thing that we kind of understood is that confidential discussions are actually okay, right? We don't have privacy issues, or sharing things in the office can sometimes be a challenge. And then the next thing is we're allowing people to kind of have, they're thinking more creatively. They're thriving with the ability, because they're kind of more focused and honed on that. And then of course, reading activities, anything that requires kind of that ability to concentrate, we're seeing kind of go up. Now, the things in the activities that are better in the workplace. So what we're seeing is basically space for sharing materials, basically learning from others, right? We're missing that connection again, but part of that connection is about us learning and kind of being connected, but learning how we behave, what activities are successful, what our activities are kind of frowned upon. So this becomes really, really critical. And of course, informal socialization is really important. And then finally, hosting, customers and visitors and things like that. There's a large impact on that. So what are we seeing as the floor plate? What is the future? What are we going to see, not only as we move back, whenever that point is, what are we going to see? Well, we think that there's going to be a huge piece of the workplace that's going to change, because a lot of people are actually enjoying working from home. A lot of people have learned new activities, new behaviors, and they're actually going to create what we're calling the hybrid office, where we have a solution of 3 areas that we're going to work. The office, at home. Obviously, the office is great for teaming and brainstorming and socializing. Our home activities, we've talked a little bit about kind of this ability to concentrate and schedule things and work off-site. And then the third places, and this is places for us to socialize and meet. You may think of co-working spaces or areas where we can actually get work done. Some people need these spaces, as they're going to basically have trouble focusing, especially if our kids are at home and things like that. So we're really seeing this. And what we expect is that workers are going to ask for space or a little bit of latitude with our ability to basically come in on Tuesday through Thursday, we think are the peak days. Mondays and Fridays, they're going to actually ask to be working from home. So that's part of the predictions that we start to see. Now, as we have talked about our culture types here, we need to understand that each of these culture types will respond differently and have different percentages of working at the office, at home, and in the third place. Very, very different. If you think about the collaborative folks, they're obviously going to be working from home, when they are actually working at the office and so forth. They're going to want to be there so that they can socialize and connect. Create folks are going to want to also be in the office quite a bit so that they can connect, so that they can basically have that brainstorming activity and so forth. But compete folks, they're going to be working either in third space or at home more so that they can facilitate the things that they need to get things done. All right, so what does all this mean and how do we put this together? So one of the things that we've done at Haworth is we've done a study to understand kind of what are these resources and stresses of inside the pandemic, and how do they affect us in the workplace? So we looked at this, and this is all a North American study. We had a pretty equal gender split. Our ages were around 18 to 72, and a lot of people, about 36% were working remotely. 45% were kind of a hybrid solution, and then 19% on-site only. So as we looked at this, we were basically breaking this up into a 4-quadrant box. First, in the vertical direction, we're looking at how stable or fluid is the situation. And again, how internally or externally focused are we? And what we're doing is we're looking at 2 big categories. How does the workplace respond, and how does the individual respond in the workplace? And what are the effects of stress on those 2 areas? So what we're looking at on the right is this kind of long-term outcomes here. And then these are more of our daily outcomes as we start to do that. And the workplace and individuals, we're basically broke that up into, object and condition, social support, and then individuals, it was constructive resources, and then the energies that it takes to basically get that work done along the way. Now, this was broken up into a lot of different categories, but the big categories were workspace user control, obviously coworker interaction, technology and tools, space variety, ambient qualities, legibility, policies, and then culture. And what we did is when we put this through this, we actually had some performance outcomes that come through from that. So this chart is really important. As we look at the 4 categories across the top, this is what we're expecting 3 categories here, or 3 columns, where we would have kind of remote only, obviously working from home, or on-site only working. But what we found is that there's actually 2 types of hybrid solutions. One is where we are predominantly kind of working remotely or working at home. And then the other is where we're actually predominantly working more on-site. And as we looked at this, this became our high performance group here, because they had higher user control. They had, co-working interactions were actually higher because they had the ability to kind of go in and out of the situation to get that social interaction, but also to have the ability to focus and concentrate. We had tools and technology. Obviously, there was a higher understanding around that. Space, they enjoyed a lot. There was a gain with more variety of space and being able to choose that. Our ambient qualities, we found that there was a much higher gain. And then our legibility. And what we mean by that is just how clear and simple or intuitive is the space to use. And there was basically on site, but this group that was on site part of the time in a hybrid solution actually had a higher gain. And then of course, policies and culture became a higher gain also for this group. So really our highest performance group became the folks that were actually on site, but actually were working from home. And so that was an interesting insight. And I think that's a predictor as to what we're going to see as we move back into the workplace. So we were also looking at stress and our sensory perception of sensitivity. And what we mean by that is how go with the flow are we basically, right? How much do we think that there is the ability to kind of adjust and just kind of work with it? And obviously what we found is that there was a huge amount of people that were kind of moving more into this high sensitivity area. This is really an indicator of what's happening with our people, that stress level's going up. We're seeing higher levels of burnout, and we're seeing that people are really being fatigued by this. So as you talk to your company or talk to your employees, really map out and understand kind of where they are in that as we move forward. So what did we find? So obviously, as we look at this and we're talking about things that are on site, we found that the culture, legibility, and ambient qualities were the attributes that people and the resources that people felt like were the most important. As people were more remote, virtual culture, user control, and tech and tools became the most important. So these are kind of the lasting impacts of what we think are happening right now. Remote work is here to stay. I don't think anybody would argue that that's probably not going to happen. And I think people are going to basically be pushing back on our leaders inside of our organizations to really help to transfer that. We found, we did say we think they'll be working, 1 to 2 days from work. It may be as much as 3 to 4 for some groups. It just depends on what level of interaction people are needed to get things done. Are they working on group projects? Or are they working on individual projects? We talked a little bit about mental stress and burnout. This is really the next wave in the workplace that we need to start getting ready for. And this is why it's so important as we talk about the mental health of our employees, what's happening. We're seeing that burnout is the next tsunami that's coming, and stress is at all-time high levels. Obviously, physical and virtual culture must be cultivated. And leaders, I really would encourage you all to talk to your leaders inside your organization, because so many people don't know how to deal with this. Management is not taught, and dealing with virtual culture is such an issue right now. It's really critical. We've all got to engage and retain our employees right now. And it's very important. It's even more critical than ever as we all stay virtual, that we have more connection to us. The other interesting thing is that we found that the workplace was actually considered a high resource and a stress buffer to actually start to kind of relieve some of our stress inside the workplace. We think that user control is absolutely critical. We think that the space has to support a wide variety of activities, and people need more choice. Think about it this way: there's no one space that works for a worker. Really, there's probably 7 or 8 different types of spaces that really can be designed effectively when you're only focusing on certain aspects of the behaviors and traits that you're looking at. And then obviously social spaces are going to really help reduce our stresses. These are going to help us talk about this, to really kind of work through where are we. And as we all kind of heal through this thing, the workplace is going to be kind of that central hub of connection, if you will, of trying to get us all reconnected and socialized again. So as we kind of look at this, I wanted to kind of see if there were any questions, but I also wanted to point out that there's a wealth of information and resources available to our community here. We've got working from anywhere, the user experience, kind of employee health and mental health challenges, and then kind of nurturing this culture. And all of these can be found at haworth.com. Of course, you can always reach out to us as there's questions and things like that. But I wanted to see, Charlie, are there any questions or anything that maybe have come up at this point?
I have not seen any in the chat, Brad. I want to thank you for all the information, and to everybody. This is a lot of information to take in, but I want to encourage anybody to ask as many questions as you want. And if you're not comfortable doing that in this format, reach out to me at any time. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we can certainly entertain whatever questions you can throw out. And we're adjourned. No, I also want to say that when all this stuff shakes out and we get some sense of normalcy back, that I encourage and invite everyone to come and see our showroom when we start having visitors back in, and understand how the things that Brad has gone through can be applied to those spaces, and we do those examples here. And even more exciting is that when we're able to start visiting each other's places of business again, the Chamber of Commerce has gone through quite a facelift, and a lot of the things that Brad has gone over today, we've implemented in helping them figure out how to best address that. And I just can't wait for them to show that off to everybody. Of course, it's special and meaningful for us, but for them and what that means to this city is going to be incredible to watch. So,
absolutely.
Any questions?
And to build off of that, I'll also say that we're actually working and doing workshops with a lot of customers as they start to think about how to kind of make these steps. And the key to that is thinking about it in 2 areas. One is obviously kind of in the immediate future, and then again in the 2 to 5 year for, what are the long-term implications of this? And so we've developed workshops to actually help support those types of activities and to actually help you get back into the workplace when we're finally to that point. So we do appreciate that.
James Little Jr. asked if this will be available. I believe it will be recorded. I know it's being recorded, and I believe it'll be distributed and available to all the participants.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for your time today. We do appreciate it. We do appreciate what everybody's doing. Obviously, with that first session, we thank you all for wearing your mask and staying safe right now. And as we move back into the workplace, we'll be poised and positioned to try to help in any way we can.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, very much for the time, for letting us share this information with you. It's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose when it's not a one-on-one engagement, but Brad does a great job. And Brad, we appreciate your time. And anybody, if you have additional questions, like I said before, please reach out. Feel free to leverage us. That's what we're here for. It's an interesting time these days, and we're trying to do our best to provide education and resources outside of what your office may or may not need physically. We've got a whole lot of, we've got a big brain trust to pull from. So,
absolutely. Well, thank you all. We do appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Everybody have a great weekend, and happy Thanksgiving holiday.